So you've got two applications before you, both the full planning application for the proposed change of use, and that's a change of use for a residential dwelling that's use class C3 to a residential care home for up to 6 children or young people. And then you've got the associated listed building application that relates to a change to the windows on both the two listed buildings. So the application here is before committee because there's been more than 2 letters of objection that are contrary to the officer recommendation of approval on both items. So I will treat it as one presentation for the purposes of running through the issues, and then obviously we need to have 2 separate decisions on the applications. So as I say, the application is for the change of use from a use class C3 to C2. It's looking to house 6 young people between the ages of 13 and 18, and you will see, and I've got a slide in a moment, that there is a letter of support from Essex County Council who take the lead in the matter of rehoming these children. There's 3 care staff and a facility manager proposed, so the 3 care staff would operate on a 12-hour rotation system between the hours of 7 and 9, and then the next staff would take over at 7 in the evening and go through till 7 in the morning. So there'll always be someone on site managing the property. And in addition to that, you've got a site manager from Monday to Friday between 9 and 5, but also on call if there are issues that need to be dealt with and arising. The application also seeks retrospective planning consent for the installation of sash windows. There's been some unsympathetic UPVC windows put in on both of the buildings. I will show you some photos of those, and that relates to a listed building element. With the exception of those windows, there's no alterations proposed to either the main building or the outbuilding, either internally or externally. So you can see the application site is edged in red. It's a former Harlow depot, after which it was a supported care home. It is currently vacant. Both the dwelling and the outbuilding are Grade 2 listed. They were listed back in 1981 independently. The dwelling itself has 4 bedrooms and the outbuilding has 2 self-contained residential units. It's not in a conservation area. The green belt and the local wildlife site are immediately due south on the other side of Latin Common Road, and the site is in flood zone 1, so in the least sensitive area for flooding. This is just a context plan. You can see the site with the star. It's a mixed-use area. You've got Clifton Hatch immediately to the west of the site. You've got schools in the vicinity, and as I say, you've got the green belt and the local wildlife site on the opposite side of the road. This is the aerial image. You can just see clearly the 2 buildings, the main house frontage and the long linear building to the eastern side of the main house, which is single-storey in nature. So this is the actual listing details for the house. So it was listed in 1981. And the listing details for the outbuilding, again listed at the same time, but both of independence. Just turning to some of the photos, so you can just see what we would consider to be unsympathetic replacement windows, UPVC, so the proposal looks to reinstate the former wooden sash windows. And just turning some of the other elevations, that's proposed vehicular access into the site, which would be retained, and Essex County Council are content with the level of parking on the site to meet the needs of the proposed use. And that's a view back from Clifton Hatch. You can see clearly the 2 buildings, the 2-storey main house and the single-storey outbuilding. These are the amended plans that have come in. Primarily, there's no external changes apart from the windows, which you can see, and the window details. So the proposed floor plans are as existing. Okay, the key issues are as listed in your report, and you'll note, members, that there's been 22 objections to the application. They're listed on page 29. There's been no further responses received since this report was made public. So you can see the main issues that the local community are considering when they've sent their responses in. Turning to the principal development, again, we fall back to policy PL2, which is the community facility. And we have evidence, and you can see from the screen, from Essex County Council in terms of the need for this facility to home these young children. So in terms of the officer's view, we consider that the proposal is policy compliant in terms of the policy, in terms of the need. It's still being retained in a residential use. and it is in what we would consider to be a sustainable location for people to access services and facilities within the proximity of this site, schools, shops, etc. There's bus stops in close proximity. There's no loss of housing proposed. It still remain in a residential use, so therefore it complies with policy H4 of the local plan. Turning to the impact on residential amenity, and you will probably see that that is the main concern, or one of the main concerns affecting the local residents. Whilst we accept that it is a more intense use than currently is the case or was previously, we do not feel that housing 6 young adults with the rotation of the care staff to be so significant as to cause an unacceptable impact on residential amenity, given it is a formerly residential property that could house a relatively large number of people if it was sold on the open market. There's no changes to the fenestration, with the exception of the windows. There's no additional overlooking to any neighbouring properties. Those windows are existing in the same place. In terms of the management and any concerns there may be had in terms of the nature of the occupants and the impact on the local community, they will have to be monitored by Ofsted and the Quality Care Commission, so there will be mechanisms in place to ensure that the use is compatible with the surrounding residential property, and mechanisms in place to ensure that there is a reporting mechanism and a management of that home for those children to help with the local amenity. In terms of standard of accommodation, there's no increase in number of rooms. There is a sufficient garden to meet the needs of the occupants. So the exception is there's no change to the windows. In terms of the heritage issues, I say the building is vacant. It's reusing a vacant heritage asset, so there is an a maintenance issue of making sure that that building is maintained for future generations. And just draw members' attention to the associated listed building application that deals with the fenestration and the benefits that would arise with that. There's no requirement for biodiversity again to be complied with, as there's no physical works proposed, so it's exempt from that, and there's no issue in terms of flooding. Turning to the listed building application, item 10 on the agenda, and that looks at the changes in terms of the exterior fenestration, noting there's no internal changes. We had amendments to the application during its life regarding window design to go back to the original sash windows, and I'll show you those in a brief moment. The Heritage Officer, Essex County Council Place Services, are content with the changes, and officers feel that that is acceptable, having due regard to section 66, subsection 1 of the Planning, Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act, and obviously policies within the local plan. So you saw a slide of the windows that are currently there at the moment. So these are the windows that were formerly on the building that the applicant is taking it back to. So you can see that there's a heritage improvement to what is there at the moment. Turning to recommendation, members, in terms of agenda item 9, the application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions listed in the report. And turning to agenda item 10, the recommendation is to grant listed building consent in accordance with the conditions in your report, and obviously the details on the screen before you.
Thank you, Liz. Stephanie Lee Dwyer. Now you've got 3 minutes on each application. I don't know whether you cover it all under the first 3 minutes, or you want to have a second 3 minutes.
No, I will come back.
You'll just do it under 3, or you're coming back.
I'll come back.
Okay.
Back for the LBC.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good evening. My name is Stephanie Lee Dwyer. My husband and I own Crab Farm Cottage. We're neighbours to the east of Crab Farm. I'd like to state from the outset that my husband and I do not have a problem with living next door to a children's home, but we do have a problem with the applicant's proposal use of the outbuilding for accommodation as outlined, and disagree with elements of the report to committee. Firstly, it's unreasonable to assert that a family unit using the outbuilding would result in the same loss of privacy. Whether a family unit consists of 1, 2 or even 3 generations, it has a level of stability and consistency Yes, a family would and should use the outbuilding, but there would not be a revolving door of vulnerable young people placed in there who, sadly, to quote the applicant, may have been subjected to neglect and various forms of abuse. Unlike a family unit, we'll never be able to form a relationship with the young people placed in the outbuilding. It would be inappropriate for us to do so, and yet should we be in our garden outside their windows, we'll be as close to the applicants as I am to this microphone. On Sunday, the farm's intruder alarm went off. It continued sounding for almost 24 hours, and a steady stream of frustrated people arrived at our door, thinking that it was something to do with us. Almost without exception, people were shocked by the proximity of the outbuilding as they stood at our door. It is 3.6 metres from our bedroom and only 10.4 metres from our living area, which has 10 metres of floor-to-ceiling windows. You'll be like exhibits in a zoo every time a new person moves in. It's like you've got a fence with windows. Because of the unique situation, we are surprised that no one from the council has requested permission to access our land to truly evaluate policy PL2. It is quite clear from our objection that disability is a relevant factor and consideration. As a person with multiple disabilities, including autism, I currently don't feel considered at all. There would be greater equivalence with the family's use of the outbuilding if the proposed studio with the 3 windows opening into our garden be restricted to use by staff only for administration purposes and private meetings rather than lived in, so that just the studio with a single room opening into our garden would be used to accommodate a young person who's perhaps on a pathway plan. This would then provide private shower facilities for staff cycling to work, provide a means for staff to be close enough to monitor a vulnerable person in a self-contained studio, and we wouldn't lose all of our privacy and amenity of our garden. As I lose more and more facility to multiple sclerosis, my garden has increasingly become my sanctuary. To lose this on top of everything else is too much. New subject. Regarding internal alterations, in addition to the window, one of the first things the applicant did was to instruct the builder to demolish both a fireplace and an internal wall on the ground floor of the main house, install the necessary RSJs and seal up 2 internal doorways, thus removing the ground floor wheelchair accessible bedroom that was located to the left of the accessible ground floor bathroom. As we can see, the former bedroom is nowhere to be seen on the plans. Sadly, one can only infer from the removal of this facility that there is no intention for the organisation to ever accommodate a wheelchair user and would seem contrary to provision under the Equality Act of 2010. The demolition work was reported via email to Enforcement Officer Paul Dean on the 4th of March and to Mick Gavin by telephone. It is inexplicable why the demolition and alterations are not mentioned anywhere within the report to committee and are explicitly denied in the application. As a wheelchair user, I'm disappointed and left with the feeling that the needs of young people with physical disabilities are not being considered and simply don't matter. It was a valuable space and could be used by all. Thank you.
Mr. Cherry, is that you? Oh no.
That one. Okay. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address this matter about the planning permission for the children's home. I believe I speak on behalf of many of the concerned residents who believe that granting permission for this would significantly impact our quality of life and the peaceful enjoyment of our homes. Our primary concern centres on the potential loss of amenity for residents. The children's home would introduce a series of disruptive elements into our quiet neighbourhood. We're anticipating increased noise levels, particularly given the early starts of the day. The plan indicates that staff members will begin arriving at 7 a.m. every morning throughout the year. There'll be no respite, no days off, and for many of us, this early influx of vehicle movements means the end of our peaceful mornings and the beginning of persistent noise disturbances. The disruption is not a minor inconvenience, it directly affects our right to enjoy our houses in peace. The increased vehicle movement is not the only issue. This home will employ 6 staff members. I know only 3 will be on site at any one time, plus the manager. But it will be all the everyday movements associated with it. Things like going shopping, taking the children to doctors, taking the children to school, all the various to-ins and throw-ins, which, because of the way the street is laid out, as you can see, Clifton Hatch is sort of a cul-de-sac with what would be the children's home forming the end of it. All of the noise funnels down the road. As Mrs. Dyer said, 3 days ago, the alarm was gone off for 24 hours. No one in the street slept. It was a nightmare. It was awful. So that's one of couple of the things that we're concerned about. You know, it's just going to fundamentally alter the character of our neighbourhood, which is a tranquil area, and it's going to be one that's now going to be constant activity, constant noise. The planning officer has basically said that he believes public interest outweighs the impact on the residents, but I think this overlooks the tangible and immediate effects that this is going to have on our daily lives. You know, we should have a right to expect to be able to enjoy our property peacefully, quietly, and the impact of this planning decision goes far beyond theoretical benefits to public benefits to practical consequences for us, for the residents, which appears to be minimised in the assessment. Not a single resident that's been canvassed has expressed an opinion in favour of putting this through. So for it to be forced through, I think would be wrong. In conclusion, just asking that you carefully weigh up the potential for increased noise and traffic disruptions and the rights of the residents to enjoy their homes peacefully. Thank you. Thank you.
Our next speaker is not here, but Nicole's the applicant. She's going to read out a written statement, and which is from the planners, and that will cover.
Thank you. Firstly, the applicant wishes to apologise for removing the timber windows from the property and can confirm he has liaised with the council on the design and application to replace the timber windows. The applicant provides essential specialist care for looked after children who are among the most vulnerable in our society by focusing on creating stable, family-centric environments to ensure that these children receive the support and nurturing homes they need. Before a child is placed in such home, a stringent risk assessment is carried out to ensure that their placement is acceptable and that they are professionally trained staff to meet their individual needs. All staff and children would be aware of what constitutes acceptable behaviour and any form of discipline to ensure a consistent approach to rules and their behaviour. The proposed would generate no greater level of noise disturbance or traffic movements than an average 6-bedroomed dwelling, especially as the children are supervised at all times. The only difference between a residential dwelling and the proposed use is that care is provided by qualified staff and not their parents. Due to the site's sustainable location, the applicant will encourage staff to use alternative sustainable modes of transport to travel to and from work, which will also contribute to reducing the care home's carbon footprint. Any visitors to the home would be pre-booked to ensure that these would be well managed and controlled. These meetings would not be dissimilar to a residential dwelling where a family is caring for their child with special needs requirements, or a large family residential home with family having friends and family visiting them. There have been no objections from the local highway authority or any other statutory consultees. The government supports the proposed use in residential areas under Section 8 of the MPPF to achieve a healthy, inclusive and safe space to ensure a cohesive community can benefit from the specialised support provided by the applicant for these vulnerable children in a family environment. This will enable the children to successfully navigate positive change in their lives, to become valued members of society through contributing to a successful, safe, strong, cohesive and sustainable society. The proposals will provide a long-term viable use of the listed building to ensure that it is preserved for future generations. The proposals comply with the Council's adopted planning policies and the MPPF, and it will provide much-needed specialist residential care for children and young people without resulting in any adverse impacts that would significantly and outweigh the benefits for granted planning permission. I therefore duly request that the members of the committee support the planning officer's recommendation.
Forgot to turn on. We're just dealing with the change of use application first. Any questions or clarification? Okay, Councillor Morrison.
Thank you very much. Easy question coming up. Because reference has been made to this, what is the proximity between what is still an outhouse but will be adapted and refurbed between that little building and the neighbouring garden? Because
points have been made about that, about how near it is.
Hopefully the picture on the screen will show the relationship between the outbuilding. The outbuilding isn't proposed to be refurbed, it is as existing. So it's already within 2 self-contained flats in a residential use. So there's no change to either the exterior or the interior of that outbuilding. So that's continuing in reality in a residential use. You can see the garden of the property that's been referred to, which is due east of that. So you can see that relationship, and that's as existing. Correct. It has a close relationship. It's had a close relationship for a number of years, and it's been in residential use for a number of years.
Thank you. Shepherd.
Just very briefly, just as similarly to as Councillor Morrison said, it's been referenced in spoken, of course. Similar to Councillor Morrison, as has been said, it was referenced in spoken contributions. Can I just confirm officers are content that you still do consider the application does not give rise to any concerns in respect to the Equalities Act, and you feel this application is compliant with that Act?
That's correct. Officers believe it's compliant, hence the recommendation before committee tonight.
Just one, Chair. In the presentation, it referred to the Quality Care Commission. Is that not CQC? So it's the Care Quality Commission?
Yes, so there's separate legislation and requirements that Essex County Council, who in reality are going to be responsible for placing these children in a home, will need to comply with, and that's the Quality Care Commission and Ofsted, thank you. Yeah, so that's outside. If there's separate regulations I need to comply with, that's outside of the planning function, but there will be particular controls in place to deal with how it's managed and operated.
No more questions, clarifications? Oh, more?
It didn't show anything, but is there plans to house children with disabilities there?
Sorry, do you mind repeating that for me, please? Apologies.
Based on the plans, there didn't seem to be any adaptations. Is there plans to hold children with disabilities there?
There's no plans for adaptations, whilst building regulations do seek requirements for disabled access. When you come to matters of listed building, there is an acceptance that that can't always be undertaken in a manner sympathetic to the heritage assets. So I think that's the difficulty with adapting listed buildings, is you alter potentially the fabric internally and externally of that building. So there is a relaxation in building control regulations with regards to disabled access. If the operators do require alterations in due course, and that's a matter they can come back to us with and present plans to us in terms of full and listed building applications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you pull the microphone towards you?
Chairman, though I have great sympathy for the people living round with the fear for noise and things like this, the home seems to me to be the ideal situation for the age group of children we're looking at, and the fact that it's quite a lot, you know, it's a big enough house for kids. We know that a lot of children in the country need extra support and things like that, and these kids obviously do. So from my point of view, I think the house and the way that it's situated is ideal for these children, and I will certainly be voting for this.
Thank you, Chair. I too agree, and I will be voting for this because the Essex county has said that we need more children's homes. We've got Ofsted, we've got the Care Quality Commission for safeguarding. The staff are trained, they are professionals, they are going to car share, they've got the public transport side of it. I presume the children are not going to be in there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They will be travelling around because that's what they also need to be out with the, you know, on different transport within the community as well. And I think that it's all being planned extremely well. It's been empty for 2 years. It's a big building, and it would be something that the Essex County side, they really need to place these children that are special needs. They need places where they can be together with staff they trust and overseen by Ofsted and the Quality Care. And I totally agree with what's going on and that we support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else? Councillor Shepherd?
Just for the interest of balance, Chair, because I do feel we should refute the comment that planning applications are forced through. Of course, every application is weighed up on its merits, and we give due consideration to all the material planning matters within an application. I will sympathise with the speakers who have spoken against this in the fact that obviously the concern about the fire alarm testing clearly is an issue. I wonder if there's any scope within this application. I couldn't quite grasp what the issue with the fire planning was, but clearly it's disruptive. In terms of routine fire testing, could we pass a condition in terms of the testing takes place at non-antisocial hours, so in the middle of the working day or times where residents will be out the house?
I don't think that's something for us to deal with, is
No,
it?
I mean, the testing of the fire, I mean, the building isn't in Harlow Council's ownership at the moment, so it wasn't a matter. As soon as we were alerted to the fact of the alarm going off, we did contact the current owners. They went in and resolved it once we became aware of the issue. Moving forward, if this application is approved, that will fall into the hands of the operators to deal with. In terms of hours of testing, we couldn't impose that as a condition. That would be an internal management, and it may well be they need to test at different times to make sure they have the right evacuation process in place. So to do it when it was empty may defeat the purpose of testing a fire alarm to its maximum benefit.
Thank you. No more? I'll just say a couple of words as well. So, you know, yeah, it's a building that is crying out to be used. I think it's currently unused, and when they get unused, they get dilapidated. And it looks a lovely building from what I can see. And yes, Essex are desperate for spaces for children to go to, and it fits there nicely. I don't think personally there'd be a great problem with traffic, but there's traffic around that area anyway, because you've got the shops and you've got the flats, so there's quite a lot of to comings and goings. So I don't believe it would be any worse. So with that, we'll go to the recommendation. This is for the change of use, which is on page 48, which is to grant permission to a change of use. All those in favour? Is that unanimous? Yep, that is. Right, so now we deal with the listed building consent. You're not making another note?
No, Chair, I've gone through the presentation. I will leave the slides
Does
up.
Stephanie Lee Dwyer want to come back and have your second 3 minutes?
Thank you. When deciding when to purchase Crab Farm Cottage, the unusual configuration of buildings and very close proximity of the farm's outbuilding were a concern, but we were reassured by two things. Firstly, there was a restrictive covenant on the farm which states not at any time to carry on or to permit to suffer to be carried upon the property any trade or business. A children's home, although very worthy and a difficult undertaking, is still very much a business. And secondly, we were reassured by the fact that the 4 steel windows with wood surround on the outbuilding's rear elevation had extremely high opacity, obscure glazing, and could not be altered or removed because of the building's listed status. They were quite unlike anything we'd seen before and were obviously very old. There's not been any pictures of the outbuilding's windows or the reference to the fact that they're steel. The inappropriate UPVC windows that the applicant installed not only have a much more bulbous profile but have significantly more transparent glazing than we can easily see through. Yes, the 4 windows should be replaced, but there is no mention in the report to committee as to the level of glazing opacity that would be required for these windows. We believe that this should be stipulated. There is no mention that these historical windows were made of galvanised steel with a wood surround, and yet this information was provided to Paul Dean together with photographs when the windows were first removed. If the original steel windows were sent to reclamation, as is good practice, we believe that efforts should be made to retrieve them and reinstall them if possible. Moving on, it states in the report to committee that the site has been vacant for a number of years. This is misleading. I would like to clarify that the main farmhouse has been fully occupied and in continuous use for more than 17 years, except for a short void period in between 2 tenancies, which was approximately 12 years ago. And of course, for a few weeks just before the property went to auction. It is only the outbuilding that has been used for storage, but not lived in for the past 17 years. In closing, comparing photographs from historic England, which show the farmhouse and the outbuilding pretty much as they were when we moved in 17 years ago, it is very sad to see the buildings today with a proliferation of historically inappropriate additions that have just been allowed to happen, even though concerns have been raised and reported. I even informed the builders that the building they were working on was Grade 1 listed, and yet the applicant asserts that they didn't know. Most were installed by the previous owners, but the applicant has begun adding to them without first obtaining LBC. Yes, lighting is necessary, but the floodlights together with their wiring could have been installed unobtrusively under the soffits rather than being tacked onto the brickwork halfway down the building. The white plastic modern lighting on the front of both the farmhouse and the recent further additions to the outbuilding are just wrong, and something more in keeping could and should be chosen. And finally, the satellite dish could have been situated more sympathetically rather than on the south elevation facing the road for everyone to see. Now would be an ideal opportunity to stop the rot, restore these buildings and preserve them for future generations. They're not ours to simply do as we wish. This applicant knew that they couldn't fail to understand that this was a Grade 2 listed building, and yet they've worked on the principle of it's better to ask forgiveness than it is to seek permission. This is wrong. I understand that a children's home is very, very important, but the destruction of this building, there's already an accessible ramp there. They took out all the disabled facilities. I know this is probably not the forum, but it just seems that the destruction of the building has been horrid. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any questions or clarification? Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about the design or the construction, possibly is the correct term, of the windows. On page 48, in the first paragraph in the assessment section, it says, glazing bars should be integral or integral, whichever you prefer, and not applied. So presumably, are we talking about astragals? And this is, I think that should be it. This is because they do not accurately reflect the architectural values and interest of multi-paned windows. So the they refers to applied. Could you clarify that for me? So in other words, what sort of windows do we want to have? What is the ideal window? I'm trying not to use replacement windows because we've already had replacement windows in this building.
Thank you, Councillor. So let me just go back to the original photo of the buildings. So they're the windows that have been put in without listed building consent. And that's what relates to that first paragraph of that assessment, that they are unsympathetic windows to the character of the listed building. Subsequent discussions took place with the applicant, and you can see on the elevations the windows that are proposed to go back to which are as were there previously and shown on that slide there. And you will see in the second paragraph of the assessment that those details have been assessed by the council's historic advisor, who are content with those windows, and they are a suitable reinstatement of windows on both of those buildings. So it's going back to what was there previously.
Can I just... So there'll be the wooden ones put back in, which would have been when the building was built. So that's what it is. They won't be plastic anymore. They go back to the original. That's the right way of putting it.
That's correct, Chair.
Yeah, that's correct. Any more clarification on that? No? Okay, the recommendation is on page 48 to grant permission for that. All those in favour? Can I just go back to number 9, which was for the change of use? There was an additional informative clause which I forgot to add into the vote. So can we have a re-vote on that one, please, to include the informative clause?
So,
All those? No? Couldn't hear what he said. Sorry, say that again. Sorry. Number 9, okay, because of to include the informative clause about the water suppression system. So all those in favour of the recommendation to grant the change of use, including that informative clause? Councillor Morrison? No? Okay. We're all right now. Sorry.